Ladies and gentlemen, Seong-Gye is one of the most beloved commanders in all of Rise of Kingdoms history, even though he is one of the very first legendary commanders that shows up on the Wheel of Fortune. In my opinion of Seong-Gye and whether or not you should be getting him as a new player in Rise of Kingdoms has completely changed here in 2025. So today we're going to go over everything there is to know about Seong-Gye, whether or not you should be getting your hands on him, and if you should be using him in KVK1, KVK2 and the end game. Man, every year I swear this is going to be the last year that Seong-Gye is relevant, and here we are. He seems more relevant now than last year, which is just insane. So anyway, what's going on, guys? Cheers. If you guys appreciate updated guides for older commanders, drop a thumbs up down below and let me know. Maybe I'll bring you guys some more. But first, how do you even get Seong-Gye? I know this is a question that mainly newer players ask. Everyone else kind of already knows, but if you take a look here, it says you can get him from exchanging universals or the Wheel of Fortune. So it's going to take 10 sculptures to summon him from the Wheel of Fortune. He does come around at the very beginning of the game, a couple of weeks into your kingdom, so don't worry, you'll have your hands on him before you get into major KVK1 fighting. But this is the #1 way. Now there are other ways to get your hands on Seong-Gye. So for example, later down the line he does show up in the daily special offer, as you can see right here, but he does not show up in things such as the legendary chests or the regular golden chests, which is crazy because if you guys have been playing the game since the beginning, you'll know that the first 50 kingdoms in Rise of Kingdoms actually had Richard and YSG in the golden chests, which is insane. They don't have that anymore, they got rid of that. But let me know in the comment section below if Lilith should bring that back. I feel like Seong-Gye and Richard in the golden chest would be awesome. Anyway, 99% of you guys are going to get him from the Wheel of Fortune, and he is an archer, garrison and skill tree commander. Now Seong-Gye, despite having the garrison tree, is very rarely used as a garrison commander. It's something that you could try in KVK1 or pre-KVK home kingdom, but really it's not that often that you're going to use Seong-Gye as a garrison commander, as a primary, because as you guys know, only the talents for the primary commander matter when you're open field fighting, rallying or garrisoning. So if you're going to use him as the secondary, his talents don't really matter at all. Keep that in mind. But okay, so he's an early game legendary archer commander. What exactly does Seong-Gye do? Well, if we take a look at his first skill before he gets his expertise here, which you can see I already have, it says that he deals direct damage to up to 5 enemy troops in a fan-shaped area with a damage factor of 1400, and every additional target that you hit will reduce the damage done to each target by 15%. Now that little sort of caveat there at the end is just to make sure that you're not dealing way too much damage with AoE in the game, but despite most commanders having this little catch, it's still worth it to run mostly AoE commanders even in the end game, so keep that in mind. The second skill says whenever this commander's troop launches a basic attack, it has a 10% chance to gain 100 extra rage and gain a 100% bonus to archer attack for 3 seconds with a 5-second cooldown. This skill is decent on archer commanders. I would say this is equivalent to like across the board. If you average it out, it's maybe like 10% archer attack, maybe a little bit less because the cooldown. It's not great for the archer attack bonus, but the 100 extra rage is amazing. Getting this, and if you get this early in a fight, that's really good. Third skill says if this commander is serving as one of your city's garrison commanders, so keep that in mind. This skill won't do anything if you put him in a flag, fort, pass or any sort of structure. Okay, this only works for your city garrison. Your garrison gets 10% attack, so that's universal for your garrison, and your watchtowers gain 10% attack, which is absolutely useless. And I don't mean that in a hyperbolic way. Your watchtower, when your city gets rallied, dies within the first like couple of turns, so your watchtower literally does almost nothing. So I don't even know why they have watchtowers in the game anymore, to be honest with you guys, because it's so irrelevant. So this part literally is basically zero value. It's really just 10% attack for your city if you are the garrison, and that's okay, but it's not that great even in the early game. The fourth skill though is one of the best things about Seong-Gye, and it is a flat 50% skill damage bonus. So if we take a look here, it says this includes direct damage and additional damage, but does not include ranged direct damage or ranged additional damage. Okay, so that's all right. We're not using Seong-Gye as a ranged commander. Just any skill damage is going to be increased by 50%. Okay, that is huge. To this day, we have never seen another commander in Rise of Kingdoms have a 50% skill damage bonus. This is so good. It's amazing that it's on a Gen 1 commander, but at the same time, it's just a vanilla skill. There's nothing fancy about it. It's just boom, 50% more skill damage. And great news, the active skill is skill damage. Okay, and finally, the expertise does something super special here. It converts the 5 target fan shaped AoE into a 5 target circular AoE. Okay, now I know it doesn't say a circle, it used to back in the day, but it says deals direct damage to up to 5 nearby enemy troops. It shows up as a circle on the map around Seong-Gye being this center, and it bumps up the damage factor from 1400 to 1700, so an extra 300 damage factor. Really nice stuff here. Okay, now back in the day, it was basically law and I say that jokingly, but it was pretty much law that if you were going to invest in Seong-Gye, you had to get the expertise because it's so good. And that's true, but do you have to expertise him? We're going to answer that question later in the video, because my answer in 2025 might actually surprise you. But now that we know his skills, let's take a look at the talents for Seong-Gye. As mentioned earlier, he has the archer, skill, and garrison trees, and for the most part you're not going to use him as a garrison commander, and if you do, he's often going to be the secondary. So really the garrison talents don't matter here, even in the early game. This right here is pretty much the best talent build for any commander in the game that has both the archer and the skill tree. And this is, let me be very clear, for open field PvP fighting. Okay, this really, you're not going to rally with Seong-Gye. I mean, there might be some like circumstances in KVK1 or something where you might run a rally with him. Sometimes you're going to run him as a secondary in rallies anyway. So really we're just focusing on open field PvP talent builds here, and this is the one. This is it. This is the best one, and the reason for that is because, one, we get feral nature. This has a 10% chance to give you 100 extra rage. Now remember, his second skill does the same thing, so now you have a 20% chance of gaining 100 extra rage on any given turn, which is really, really nice. The second skill has a cooldown. I don't think this one has a cooldown. It's not listed here if it does, but the idea with feral nature is that you want to launch your active skills before the enemies that you're hitting. Okay, so anything that gives you rage, because remember, and I know that this might be a bit redundant for older players, but for newer players, the active skill, this is the best part about Seong-Gye, this requires 1000 rage. Okay, it has a rage requirement of 1000, and so every single turn you're gaining rage if you're hitting something, and you're going to gain a little bit extra rage if that thing is hitting you back, or you're getting hit back by something. Okay, I go into great depth in another video talking about rage, but all you need to understand is that every single turn you're going to be gaining, it's like 86 rage if you're hitting something, and a little over 100 rage if something's hitting you back. There's lots of other things that influence that. A couple of the things that will influence it are other talents we're going to talk about here. Okay, and so if your base regeneration is a little over 100 rage per turn, let's say, it really fluctuates, the chance to get an extra 100, a doubling of that, is really good. Now the rage cap is 220, so you can't get any more than that. We're not going to go all in depth about rage cap and all that other stuff, but the point is, the more rage that you get on a turn, on average, the faster you're going to cast this active skill, and this is the best part about Seong-Gye, so you want to do that as much as you possibly can here. Okay, so you come all the way up here, you grab feral nature, and you get everything along the way, which includes rejuvenate, which means you're going to gain more rage when you cast that active skill. Okay, which is really, really good. You get burning blood, which gives you 9 rage anytime you launch a basic attack. You also gain all for one, which means the secondary is going to deal 6% more skill damage. Very good. Tactical mastery is 3% all skill damage, which is really, really nice. Now let me just point out that this talent, for 3 talent points, you get 3% skill damage, which just goes to show just how insane 50% skill damage is here. It's wild. Okay, it's wild. Heraldic shield makes you take 6% less skill damage. Very nice. Razor sharp gives you 9 rage whenever you launch a basic attack, so that stacks with the 9 you get from burning blood here. You also get 8% more skill damage from venomous sting. This is incredible in the archer tree. Okay, so remember, you have 50% skill damage from Seong-Gye's 4th skill. You have 8% here. You have another 3% here, so that's what, 11% extra skill damage. Clarity gives 6% bonus to all types of skill damage for 6 seconds after you use an active skill. So there's so much bonus skill damage in these talents, it's actually kind of nuts. You gain some archer health here. You gain extra damage to infantry, which is very, very good. Infantry are very dominant these days. And then you grab arrows knocked along the way to full quiver, and you pick up things like armed and armored. Okay, so lots of really, really good talents here for the archer skill tree commanders. If you're still leveling up your Seong-Gye, I would say that these talents right here, like these are some of the least valuable out of all of the ones that we have here. So if you want to grab things like Feral Nature first, Venomous Sting, Razor Sharp, like these are all things that take priority. The first priority should be Rejuvenate and these two things over here on the skill tree. Okay, anyway, now that we know the talents and the skills for Yi Seong-Gye and how you can get him, let's quickly go over the pros and cons of Yi Seong-Gye as a legendary commander here in Rise of Kingdoms. The pros are that he's very powerful in the early game and he's even still viable in the end game. Now, he's not part of the single best archer commander pairing in the open field in the end game, but if you are an archer main player, you still are probably using Yi Seong-Gye if you're running 2 or 3 archer pairs in the end game, which you cannot really say for any other season 1 commander. Season 1 commanders are very quickly outpaced in the end game, so from a longevity perspective, he's very, very good. And besides that, on his kit, he just deals massive circular AoE damage that's boosted by over 50%. It's 50% base, but you also have the talents on him, and more than likely, even if he's the secondary, he's going to get the benefit of the talents from the primary, and most of the primary commanders that you would be pairing Yi Seong-Gye with, which we'll talk about later in this video, are also going to give him bonus skill damage. So all in all, he just deals massive amounts of AoE skill damage, which has effectively been the open field meta for years now in Rise of Kingdoms. Now, there are some new playstyles in the last like year or so, maybe year and a half, that have kind of been a little bit more valuable than just raw AoE skill damage, but that's not to say that that's not good. Really, like still 90% of the commanders that you're going to be using in the end game are still AoE skill damage or AoE damage, at least in some regard. And so the pros and what Yi Seong-Gye is good at is like perfectly in line with what the meta is for, you know, how you fight in the end game. So lots to love about Yi Seong-Gye, even though he is a very vanilla commander. But now let's talk about the cons, right? Because he's not perfect. He really is not. The first thing that is a big con with Yi Seong-Gye is you'll notice on his skills, he has no flat stats, right? There's no reliable source of stats for Yi Seong-Gye. The chance for 100 archer attack is there, but there's a cooldown and it's only a 10% chance for 3 seconds, right? So it's not very reliable and it's only archer attack. So really, he's extremely squishy. He would be considered a glass cannon. This is a term that's used in lots of RPG games to identify a character that does a lot of damage but can't take it back. Okay, you can't take any sort of damage, otherwise you die very quickly, and such is the term glass cannon. Okay, he is a glass cannon, very squishy. The second thing, and probably the biggest problem with Yi Seong-Gye, is march speed. He has no march speed on his kit at all. Okay, he's very slow. Okay, so he's like the definition of a glass cannon. Like, he can't really move very far, he can't really take any damage, but if you don't kill him, he's going to pump out a ton of damage all on his own. Okay, he is the definition of a glass cannon, and because of that, and also because of his reputation for being one for over 6 years now, he's an easy target. So this is more of a player psychology type of thing, but Yi Seong-Gye has been in the game for over 6 years now, and people know that if they see him on the battlefield, he's a target. For one, he's an older commander. For two, he's a glass cannon. He has no defenses really, and he has a little bit, we'll talk about that later, but really, like, he's a slow glass cannon, and that's a huge con for Yi Seong-Gye. But there's one other component to his kit that we haven't talked about just yet, and this is something that comes around in season 3 of KVK as far as I remember, and that is the museum. Okay, the museum gives you relics for various commanders that have been released throughout the game, and these museum relics have been released periodically over time. Their release has been a bit slower as of late, it feels like, but essentially what the museum does with its relics is it provides buffs to commanders that are a little bit older than the current meta. And the point of these museum relics is to sort of bring these older commanders up to a bit of a more usable level. Now it's not to say that these are meta commanders, because they certainly are not meta commanders even with their museum relic buffs, but it does sort of bridge that gap a little bit for the newer players versus the older players, and it kind of breathes a little bit of fresh air into these older commanders as well. And in some instances the museum relic is extremely relevant and viable, such as with Charles Martel, and especially with commanders such as Constantine, Alexander the Great, Guan Yu. These are commanders that, because of their museum relic, make them a little bit more competitive and have hung around the meta for even longer. Now with that being said, is Seong-Gye's relic any good? Well, let's take a look. It has 3 levels, which not all commanders have a three tier upgrade for their relic. In the future we could get more than that. There really has been no official confirmation on that from the developers at all. And the way that you can upgrade these relics, I guess I should explain, how do you get them? Well, if they're locked, you'll see that it costs a certain number of exhibit coins, and every time that you unlock a new exhibit, the next one you unlock will cost even more. So it's important to be very careful with which one of these you get, because you don't want to unlock a bunch of useless ones, because that's going to make the good ones later in the line more expensive. Then once you unlock the exhibit, you can unlock the relic with the relic coins over here, you can see in the top right corner, and then boom, you have your relic for Seong-Gye. Now the first tier, like when you first unlock this relic, and again this is in like season 3 and beyond of KVK, you're going to get 10% archer defense and 3% skill damage. So here we finally have some reliable stats for Seong-Gye. Remember, there's none on his skills. Here we've got some archer defense, 10%. It's a small amount, but it is nice. It's very needed, and even more skill damage, which is great. If you upgrade him to the second tier, you get 20% archer defense and 5% skill damage. So now we have a decent amount of archer defense. It's not really up to the current meta, right? We have commanders like Zhu Liang, who has 30% archer health. We have commanders like Herman Prime, who have 20% attack, 20% defense, so it's 40% of stats. So it's almost up there, right? It's almost up there. Certainly better than nothing, right? Certainly better than nothing, but the extra 5 skill damage is nice. And then finally, the third tier upgrade actually doesn't change his defense at all, but it gives him 12% skill damage, and this is just going all in on min-maxing him, right? Like this is what he's doing. He's good at skill damage, and the devs gave him even more. Okay, so remember, he has 50% of the 4 skill plus 12, that's 62% skill damage is the floor. That is the baseline amount of skill damage bonus you get, plus your city skin, plus your civilization, plus your talents, plus there's so many other ways to get skill damage, right? So he is a skill damage god. Okay, and I would say that this final tier, like I kind of wanted him to have more archer defense, right? But at the end of the day, when I really think about it, like he really is just all about skill damage, and so more skill damage is amazing, right? 10% more defense here or another 5% would not have saved him. It wouldn't have moved the needle for if he gets swarmed, right? It simply wouldn't be enough. You would need like 50% defense here for it to really move the needle, and unfortunately he doesn't get that, but he does get more skill damage, and that's what he's good at, which is why I unlocked his third tier upgrade. Okay, all in all, when compared to many of the other relics in the game, Seong-Gye's relic is definitely one of the better ones, and especially if you're going to be using him as an archer main player in the end game. So if you're going to be using 2 or 3 archer marches in the end game, there's a good chance you're going to be using Seong-Gye for how much longer, who knows, right? This could be his last year, but even still, like this is great for Seong-Gye, so it's definitely worth considering getting this museum relic. Okay, now that we've covered everything that Seong-Gye has to offer and the pros and cons, let's talk about, should you be investing in Seong-Gye in 2025? And previously, and in last year really, it was sort of a nuanced answer, right? It was really for like the super grindy free to plays or the super heavy spenders, and it was kind of this like weird thing where it's like he's the best thing to get in the early game, but he doesn't, like he kind of ages well but not as good as other things, and so really you should save your sculptures. And I'm here to tell you in 2025 that that is not the case anymore at all. Okay, pretty much all players without exception should be investing in Seong-Gye in the early game, and if you're past the early game, you're in the end game, we'll talk about whether or not you should get him still. It's less likely that you're going to need him, but we'll talk about that. If you're a brand new player in Rise of Kingdoms though, and I mean a player who has not seen season 1 of KVK yet, then you want to be getting Seong-Gye. There's really no better early game legendary commander to get, right? He is the best to get from the wheel. He is one of the strongest early game commanders, just period, right? Even still 6 years later in the early game, he's still one of the best, if not the best early game commander, because of how powerful that circular AoE ideas. And then the question is, and I kind of alluded at this earlier, right? Do you have to expertise him, right? Do you have to expertise him? Well, the answer is he's much better at expertise. There's no question, right? There's no question. It's a bump in damage. It's easier to deal that damage, and it guarantees this 4th skills at 5, right? However, we live in a different world now. We live in a different world than we did in 2024 and beyond because of the commander swap event in Rise of Kingdoms. Now, if you guys don't know what this event is, I covered it extensively here on the channel. Check it out. You can find it on the channel. You could search for it on YouTube, just commander swap Omniarch. I'm gonna have probably 4 or 5 videos that come up when you do that. But basically, at the end of KVK 2, okay, you are going to be given the option during a 5-day event to swap a legendary commander that you own for another newer legendary commander that you own. And it does come around with an event called the Gathering of Heroes, which allows new players to get their hands on some of these brand new commanders that you have no idea about, right? Like, you're looking at this and you're like, bro, who is this? How do you have King Arthur? Why does he not show up in my game, right? And that's because if you're a brand new player, you're only going to see the season 1 commanders, right? And then once you get to season 2, it's going to show you the season 2 commanders. And then once you get to season 3 beyond, then you're going to see everything. And this is a insanely good change to the game that they released a few months ago, because what this means is that you can basically make any investment you want in KVK 1 and 2, and then when this swap event comes around, then you could just transfer effectively that progress from that early game commander to some other late game commander, such as King Arthur, right? Now, I touched on this in my cavalry guide, so definitely go ahead and check that out if you want to know more about which commanders you should be getting, because there are some caveats. You can't really just swap to any commander you want, right? Like, you can't just grab Zhuge Liang. There's some other commanders you have to summon first, so it is a little bit hard. But the point is that pretty much regardless, you're going to be able to swap your Seong-Gye to at least something that's better, right? Like, at the very least, you can swap him to King Arthur, and King Arthur is just a better commander overall. Like, he just straight up deals more damage. Yes, he's a cavalry commander instead of an archer commander, so your gear's not going to swap perfectly, but your gear's probably not that great by KVK the end of KVK 2 anyway, right? So like, it's not that big of a deal. You'll mostly have like purple pieces, right? Like, that's nothing really in the grand scheme of things. And so, you know, if you end up swapping your YSG to something else such as King Arthur, then all of the progress that you made on Seong-Gye, whether he's expertised or not, gets carried over to that newer, better commander, right? So in the past, the idea was that you had to get the expertise because that was the only way to really use him to chain barbarians in the open field, and it was the only way to guarantee that you could squeeze every last ounce of damage out of him in the end game, right? Because he can barely keep up in the end game as it is, and without the circular AoE, then he is really screwed, right? But now, if you get him to 5-1-1-5 or 5-5-1-5 or 5-5-1-1, even if you don't have that many sculptures, well, great news. No matter what he's at the end of KVK 2, you can just swap him to something else, right? Which is great news, because in KVK 1 and KVK 2, a 5 target forward facing fan shaped AoE of 1400, so assuming he's not expertise, is still really good in KVK 2. It really just is, because even if he's 5-5-1-1 or a 5-1-1-1 or whatever the case is, it's 1400, a chance at a rage engine, nothing, and then 20% bonus skill damage. Like, even though he's very vanilla and plain, even at, you know, even for 190 or 380 sculptures, whatever you put into him, it's still going to be really good in KVK 2, even without that AoE. Now, let me be very clear. It's better with the AoE. Don't get me wrong. But if you don't get that expertise, it's no longer the end of the world. It's no longer wasted progress, right? Because that was the original sin, basically, is that you got partially the way through Seong-Gye, and then you get to Season of Conquest and you have a 5-5-1-1 and he's not good, he's not usable, and now you have to start dumping your sculptures into something else, and then you just kind of leave those sculptures on Seong-Gye and it's wasted. He just sits there collecting dust, and you wish that you had those 190 sculptures, right? But that's no longer the case now, because now you just can swap him for King Arthur, or you can swap him for Philip, or you can swap him for even like Shajar, for example, right? And there's a good chance that as time goes on, the developers are going to update the Gathering of Heroes event for newer players to give them a chance to get their hands on other legendary commanders that come out in the future, right? So the point is that it's no longer a waste to dump sculptures into Seong-Gye, as long as you make sure to swap him when you get the chance, right? And every player gets the chance to do so, and you need to just make sure that you have a certain number of gems. Now, if you have a fully expertise Seong-Gye, it's going to cost 12,000 gems to swap him. Okay, so keep that in mind. Or there's a bundle you can purchase, and it's a $5 bundle, and you could buy it up to 10 times, so that's $50. That I cover all that in my videos. I'm not going to go over that here, but the point is that everyone should be getting Seong-Gye. Even if you don't expertise him, he's still good in season 1 and season 2 of kvk, and then you have the choice of getting him expertise and just keeping him for end game, or really 99% of you should just be swapping him at the end of kvk2, no matter what amount of skills you have put in him, and then there you go, problem solved, progress transferred to a new commander, and it's GG, it's good to go. So TLDR, everyone should be getting Seong-Gye if you're in pre-kvk or kvk1. Okay, and so if we all agree that everyone should be getting Seong-Gye, then who should you pair him with in kvk1 through 2 or 3, right? Well, in kvk1, if you're a free-to-play player, then you're probably gonna mostly have epics with a few exceptions. We have a couple of options for commanders that you can use here. First of all, Sun Tzu is a great choice. I know Sun Tzu's an infantry commander, but you can either do Sun Tzu primary with Seong-Gye secondary as an infantry march, or you could do Seong-Gye primary, Sun Tzu secondary as an archer march. Really, like, the skills here give you some nice infantry stats in the form of 10% health. It's not much, but it's better than like the chance of attack on Seong-Gye. So really, I would say this is better as an infantry march in the early game. But the reason that Seong-Gye is so good with Sun Tzu is because they both have 5 target AoEs, and the AoE on Sun Tzu when he's expertise is effectively 1000 damage factor to 5 targets, and you get 50 rage for every troop that you hit with this, which is really good. You have another rage engine for Seong-Gye, which is amazing. Second skill's useless really unless you're using a city garrison, which that is a pair you could do. You could do Sun Tzu Seong-Gye as a city garrison, by the way. You take 7% less damage, but this says you take 10% less damage period, which is amazing for an epic commander, and you gain 10% infantry health, which is the little bit of tankiness that you really need for your Seong-Gye. And then look at this, 20% more skill damage on top of the 50 that you already get from Seong-Gye. So 70% total skill damage plus the skill damage you're going to get from the skill tree. For open field fighting, I would probably recommend something like this. Just like with Seong-Gye, you grab Feral Nature, but you have the infantry tree, and in the infantry tree there's a few interesting things. First of all, a ton of infantry health. You also gain some rage from Undying Fury. You also deal more damage to calves, and you get a bunch of march speed. With Fleet of Foot, you get march speed for infantry here, and you get march speed for infantry here. Then you get a little bit extra health and defense on the ends here, and that's pretty much it. Now, I do like Hold the Line, but in order to get Hold the Line, you do have to give up that march speed. And remember, Sun Tzu and Seong-Gye, neither of them have march speed, and so if you want to even, like, if you don't have the march speed here, you're going to show up to the battlefield after everything's already over, right? Especially because kvk1 is all calves a lot of the time, and so like you're just going to need this. It's still not that much, but it's better than nothing in my opinion, so I would say grab it. Or you could compromise and do something like this where you get only 6% of march speed, but you still grab Hold the Line. It's up to you. This is when you're hit with the basic attack though, so as long as you can play smart and avoid that, I would say do the previous build. Another commander pairing you could do would be Herman as the primary with Seong-Gye as the secondary. You could do the Seong-Gye as the primary. It doesn't really matter that much, but it's just cheaper and faster to get the epic commander to level 60, and it uses purple stars as opposed to the legendary. But you have a really nice single target damage hit and a 2-second silence and a rage reduction to the target. And look at this, by God, 10% archer march speed, yes, and 10% attack, which is nice. This is for city garrisons. Fourth skill gives you 10% more normal damage, which is whatever, and you have a 10% chance to gain 100 rage. That's amazing. That is just like the trigger chance for the 100 rage on Seong-Gye. So another rage engine, and the expertise here is really just bumping up the active skill, which is nice. I really like this a lot. The AoE on Kusunoki is nice, and he has nice defensive stats, but he has no march speed, and so really for me, I don't love the Kusunoki as much as I used to. I would rather just get the march speed and just go all in with Herman and YSG. And then of course there is Ethelfled. This is another commander that a lot of players will have some amount of investment in by kvk1, hopefully, right, if you're doing it right. She's also another 5 target AoE with a really nice debuff here. You take 20% less counter attack damage, which you are going to be taking taking a lot of in kvk1 because you don't have as much power creep in kvk1, so a lot of the damage you take is still going to be normal and counterattack damage, and you deal 20% more damage to slowed enemies. Ethelfled would have to be the primary here, but really you're probably going to be using your Ethelfled with somebody like Sun Tzu instead. So you know, this is a pairing that you could do, but not necessarily in the number one. Now if you are a sort of spender, or you're investing gold sculptures into gold key commanders in kvk1, which you can start doing now in 2025 because you could just swap them in the commander swap, there's two gold key choices here that you really can consider. There's El Cid and there's Thutmose. In between the two, Thutmose is the best way to go. He has a 3 target AoE, which has great synergy with Seong-Gye. He also gives you that 10% march speed, 15% all damage outside of territory, and 10% attack, which is nice. He gives you 10% archer defense, reduces the skill damage that you take while you're on the map, which is nice. It's a trigger chance, unfortunately, but it's still there, and you take less counterattack damage and you have a chance to instant proc. You also have a nice little expertise here as well. So all in all, unfortunately, he has the support tree over the skill tree, so it's going to be a little bit more tanky, which is nice, but it doesn't have as much damage as the skill tree, so a little bit of a trade-off there. And then El Cid is like the OG gold key archer commander, even though he has a sword. I don't know how to explain that. He's an archer commander though, even though he doesn't have a bow and arrow. Regardless, he does have a nice disable on the active skill with a 1000 damage factor, but the best part about El Cid is the second and fourth skills. The second skill gives you an instant proc of 1000, which is nice for going in and out of combat. The third skill gives you 15% march speed, which is the fastest that we've really seen. I mean, we only get 10 even on Thutmose as a legendary, right? So this is technically the fastest archer in kvk1, which is really good. 20% defense is also really nice. And the fourth skill, it says when you have less than 50% remaining, you deal 25% more damage and you gain 25% march speed, so you can get in and out of combat a lot faster. The expertise is not really very good here, but all in all, El Cid is great. I would still prefer Thutmose for being a little bit more reliable with that AoE. The, you know, sort of fast paced in and out of combat instant proc fighting style is viable, but I don't know how much that matters in kvk1 as far as it being the meta, because I feel like, you know, a lot of the players you're going to be fighting are not going to be super knowledgeable about the game anyway, because they're new players, right? And they're going to be using a lot of epics and stuff, so you don't really have to rely on strategies like that. You could just go all in on AoE skill damage and you will be good to go. Now, those are all the best archer pairs with the exception of Ethelfled and Sun Tzu. What if you wanted to run like infantry? Should you still be investing in Seong-Gye? And the answer is absolutely, because we have some really good infantry commanders that show up in kvk1. For example, you have Pyrrhus, who has the defense tree, makes him a bit tanky, which is very good, and he has some nice skill damage on the active skill, so he benefits nicely from the 50% skill damage on Seong-Gye. He has no AoE, which means Seong-Gye will give him that AoE, which is really, really nice. Okay, you have some health, some march speed, really, really nice stuff here. These are the two things that like you really want for your Seong-Gye. A little bit of extra attack here, a shield. There's a lot to love about the Pyrrhus Seong-Gye pairing, mainly because Pyrrhus is just, again, a little bit tanky, but still benefits from that skill damage bonus, and he's infantry, right? If you wanted to do something even tankier, you could do Charles Martel. The plus to this is that Charles Martel is very prickly. It hurts a lot to swarm down on Charles Martel, and he has the defense tree, and he gets a bunch of defense and health. Even without the expertise, it's 30% of tanky stats here, and he has a shield, so he's super tanky in kvk1, and his 30% all damage bonus will apply to the AoE skill damage for Seong-Gye if Seong-Gye is the secondary, right? That's how the timing works. You're going to cast this active skill, gain the bonus, fire your AoE from Seong-Gye with the 30% bonus plus the skill damage bonus, so it's crazy, right? The downside is that the skill damage bonus on Seong-Gye will not work on Charles Martel because he's not dealing any skill damage, right? So you're kind of you're losing some value from that fourth skill for sure, right? So if you want to keep your Seong-Gye alive as long as possible in the open field in kvk1, pick Charles Martel. Otherwise, everything else we talked about here is just going to deal more damage, so definitely go that route, I would say. Once we get to kvk2, you have a few options, the best of which is Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great has the same shield as Martel, except he has instant proc damage and more march speed, and he's just super good. Okay, Alexander the Great is still used in the end game meta to this day. It is in one weird little pairing, but at the end of the day, he's still great. So Alexander the Great primary, full infantry with Seong-Gye secondary, is one of the best open field marches in kvk2, period, and it has been for years. That's a great commander pairing, 100%. The other choice that you have is a commander who goes by the name of Saladin. Now, Saladin has definitely fallen off over the years, but remember, with the commander swap event, you just play with Saladin for a little bit in kvk2, and then at the end you throw them away, and that is what it is. Now I don't know when the Wheel of Fortunes come around for Alex and Saladin, so I don't know the exact timeline there, so don't quote me on that, but either way Saladin is a choice. He does have some skill damage, and again he would be the primary with Seong-Gye is the secondary, and he has some nice march speed, especially because he's a cavalry commander, so this is like the fastest that you could do basically with Seong-Gye. And then also you have the skill damage taken reduction and counterattack damage taken reduction, so the tanky cavalry version here. If you're a spender, then you probably can use Minamoto for kvk 1 and 2, mainly kvk 1. I kind of just glossed over this because, you know, most of you guys aren't spending, but if you are spending, a 5511 Minamoto or fully expertise is even better. That's going to be a pairing that you could do. So Minamoto primary, Seong-Gye secondary. I know it sounds weird, but you can do it because it is both skill damage, and the 50% bonus skill damage on Seong-Gye is going to buff this up a little bit as well, which is really good. Okay, then comes season 3 and Season of Conquest, and this is where we have to talk about Seong-Gye, because most of you, like I said earlier, if you're a new player, get him, swap him for something else, right? If you're in season 3 and you're in Season of Conquest right now, should you be getting Seong-Gye? The answer for most players is no. He is not part of the, you know, 3 or 5 army meta lineup right in the open field. I made a video recently talking about the best open field pairs. Check that out if you missed it on the channel. But a little bit of a plot twist: in the 5 army lineup that I recommend for most players, Seong-Gye is not there. Okay, so for most players, if you don't have Seong-Gye and you're in season 3 or Season of Conquest, you don't need to get him. Okay, it's not really worth it. His glory days are kind of over, right? However, if you are, you know, a spender or an older player and you've had Seong-Gye for a long time, can you still use him in Season of Conquest? And the answer is actually yes, right? Which is kind of crazy because he is such an old commander. Now he won't be in the single best archer march, but there's a few commanders you can pair him with, such as Hermann Prime. Okay, Hermann Prime as the primary gives you a nice 3 target AoE with the poison stack debuff. He gets you some stats and march speed, which you really need. You get another AoE skill damage bonus here, which is crazy, a defense reduction, and you really don't even need an expertise here. 551 would be fine, but the expertise does give you more trigger chances for your active skill. So all in all, I really like this build because it gives you the march speed and defense plus the 20% defense that you get on the museum relic, so 40% total defense. It's nice, right? It's still a little slow because he's the only one with march speed in the pairing, but at the end of the day, I think this is a really solid way to go. If I were going to run him as the primary commander, I would do something like this, where you put 2 points into rejuvenate, 3 points into emergency protection, then you grab razor sharp, venomous sting, you grab phoenix tail arrows, and then you've got an extra point left over. I just threw it here, but you could put it kind of wherever you want. You could even put it in whistling arrows if you want to. It's just not as consistent as the 1% bonus to attack, so whichever you prefer. Another commander pairing you could do would be Zhuge primary with YSG secondary, but this commander pairing is only kind of good if you are fighting close to your city and you're not really going that far. The problem with this pair is both commanders are really slow. There's no march speed here at all, right? And so like you have double 5 target circular AoEs. It's insane. You have a skill damage bonus as well here, 20%. It's nuts, right? The damage output is wild, but that's only if you can stay in the fight. And if you're the slowest thing on the battlefield, which you will be, then it's really tough, right? So if you're just, you know, if you've got enemies outside your city, you jump out, you hit them a little bit, you cast your active skills, hopefully they don't hit you back, and then you run away. That's a decent use for this, but really I would say 9 times out of 10 this commander pairing is very niche. It's only for a certain scenario, and it's only for players that don't have that many other options. So it's, you know, it's worth mentioning because Zhuge Liang's so good, right? He kind of makes everything good, but it's in practice not that common, so I wouldn't worry about it that much. The biggest pairing that we see a lot of times is either Shajar, right, primary with 2800 damage factor. She gives you a ton of health and march speed, which is exactly what you want for your YSG, right? You also have some mighty healing here, so you're a little bit helpful for your nearby allies, and you take a little bit less damage while you're on the map, so again, a bit tanky, which is very, very good. Healing yourself, which is all right. If you don't like the Shajar pairing, which is understandable, you could do something like Ashurbanipal, who is way squishier, but he does have a 5 target AoE and he does have a bonus to skill damage, right? The downside with Ashurbanipal is you have to expertise him because this is where he gets his stats. It's very random. It's kind of unfortunate. He's made for rallying, not really open field, but he's decent at open fielding anyway, so you could do Ashurbanipal primary, or if you have a Nebu from back in the day, I actually like Nebu still because he gives you the defense and march speed, and he gives you the all damage and rage reduction. So he's a little bit dated at this point. He doesn't deal as much damage as the Ashurbanipal's active skill, but his march speed is universal and he gets more defense. So all in all, I actually still like the Nebu, but again, that is a bit of an older pairing. We're kind of beyond the days of things like Boudica. We're past the time of, you know, using Henry. Like, these really aren't things that you're going to still be using with YSG these days. But I would say number one is Herman Prime, number two is Ashurbanipal, number three is Shajar, and she's pretty close to Ashurbanipal to be honest with you. Number four is Nebu, number five is Yu Liang in that one weird niche scenario, and that is pretty much it. But like I said, guys, if you want to know like when you should be using him as an end game player, you can check out my open field PvP best commander pairing guide. But all in all, like, he's going to be in your second or third archer march, so he's not like super end game meta. So really, you want to use him in the early game, KVK 1 and 2, and then when commander swap comes around, you're going to get rid of him for something else. And I guess the last thing we can touch on here for Seong-Gye is his formation. And really, I probably should have touched on this way earlier, but when you do get formations and you start to use them, the wedge formation is a no-brainer. 5% more skill damage. It goes with everything we've said in the video already, and you just want as much of archer health and all damage as you can get. This is a throwaway set, so don't think that this is like my best in slot. This is literal just garbage that's on my account. But march speed would also be decent here as well because of the slowness of him, but really, like, it's not going to save him anyway. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for my update to my Seong-Gye guide for 2025. A lot has kind of changed, even though everything has kind of stayed the same. His relic is better than it was last year, but for new players, he is back in the number one slot. You don't have to feel bad about investing in him anymore, and in fact, it is safer to invest in him now than ever. And he's still viable in the end game, but he's definitely fallen off a bit. But let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. What do you think about Seong-Gye in 2025? Can he still pull his own weight in Season of Conquest? I would love to hear from you guys. From those of you that still use him, put him in the comment section below. Let me know what you find with him. Is he still decent or not? What do you think about the strategy of just dumping all your sculptures into him and then swapping him away? I think that is like a no-brainer for pretty much everybody, but let me know in the comment section below. And while you're down there, drop a thumbs up on the video. It really helps out the channel a ton. It helps get this video out into the YouTube algorithm so other Rise of Kingdoms players might see it. And if you're new here, subscribe to the channel and click the bell to be notified the next time I upload a Rise of Kingdoms video. About 69% of you guys are not subscribed. You might think you are, so just double check. And if you want more of these older commander guides, the only way you're going to know if I post them is if you subscribe, so do that down below. And with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I will talk to you guys again soon. Peace.